In the heart of a dark valley where hope seems to have died, a powerful vision rises from the ashes. Ezekiel 37, the Valley of Dry Bones. A prophecy that not only speaks to the people of Israel, but also resonates in our lives today. Do you feel hopeless? Facing challenges that seem impossible? You are not alone. Discover how Ezekiel's vision teaches us about renewal, life, and the strength of faith in the midst of desolation. Join us on this journey of transformation and discover the message that can change your life. Imagine a vast, desolate valley where silence hangs heavy in the air. This is the scene that Ezekiel encounters when, in a vision given by God, he is led to a place full of bones scattered everywhere. These are not just bones, but completely dry bones, signaling that death occurred there long ago. There is no trace of life or hope, only evidence of something that was destroyed long ago. This powerful vision represents the spiritual and emotional condition of Israel at that time. The nation was exiled to Babylon, cut off from their promised land, their temple destroyed, and their people scattered. They were without direction, without leadership, and, above all, without hope. To the Israelites, the situation seemed as lifeless as that valley of dry bones. The question that follows is, how is it possible to restore something that was so completely destroyed? Ezekiel, a prophet called to speak to the people of Israel in the midst of exile, is confronted with this scene so that he can understand and communicate God's message to them. However, this vision is not just a description of the state of Israel. It is a powerful metaphor that can be applied to many situations in our lives today. How often do we feel like those dry bones, deprived of hope, faced with situations that seem irreversible? With this introduction, we are invited to reflect on the areas of our lives that seem barren, dead, and without hope of renewal. As we progress, we will see how Ezekiel's vision is actually a surprising message of restoration and life. The divine call to prophesy. In the face of this scenario of death and desolation, God asks Ezekiel an unexpected question. Son of man, can these bones live? It is an intriguing question because it seems contrary to all human logic. Dry bones, after so much time, certainly have no life left. Any attempt at restoration would be seen as impossible. However, Ezekiel, aware of the divine power, responds wisely and humbly. O sovereign Lord, only you know. This answer shows us something essential. Even when we do not understand how something can be restored, we must consider that God has the control and the power to do the impossible. Ezekiel knew that, by human logic, those bones could not be brought back to life. But he also knew that God had authority over life and death. Next, God commands Ezekiel to prophesy over those bones. Imagine a scene. Ezekiel, a lonely man in the middle of a valley of dry bones, is called to speak words of life about something that seems completely hopeless. Prophesy to these bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. God commands, and Ezekiel obeys. The divine command to prophesy to dry bones is a powerful symbol of faith. God often calls us to speak life into areas of our lives that seem dead. This could be a broken relationship, a stagnant career, or even our own faith that has become a failure. The question, can these bones come to life? Challenges us to believe that with God, restoration is always possible. Ezekiel's approval of God's call teaches us that even when faced with situations that seem hopeless, we must trust and act in faith, knowing that the Lord has the power to transform the impossible. The miracle of the resurrection of the bones. Ezekiel, obedient to God's command, begins to prophesy over the dry bones. He speaks the words God gave him, and something extraordinary happens. The bones, which had previously been motionless and lost throughout the valley, begin to move. Slowly, they move closer to each other, and soon the sound of bones connecting is heard. First, joints form, then tendons and flesh cover the bones. Skin then envelopes the bodies. The valley, which minutes before had been covered with dry bones, is now filled with formed bodies, as if on the verge of life. This scene is a powerful symbol of the restoration that God promises to Israel. The dry bones represented the nation of Israel, who seemed destroyed and without hope. Exile had separated them from their land and their traditions, and many had lost faith that they could ever be restored as a people. However, in his prophecy, Ezekiel witnesses the beginning of God's promised restoration. The bones, which had been scattered and lifeless, began to come together, foreshadowing the nation's safety. At this point, God had already shown his power in uniting the bodies, but something was still missing. Although the structures were in place, there was still no life in them. This point marks the first phase of restoration: organization and structuring. In our lives, this can symbolize times when we see changes taking place, but we still feel that something is missing, something essential that gives meaning to the transformation. This process of renewal is not only physical, but also spiritual. When God begins to restore something in our lives, he usually begins by bringing together the lost and broken parts. However, as with the bodies formed in the valley, this restoration is not yet complete without the presence of real life. The initial transformation is a preparation for something much greater, the breath of life that is to come. The scene is now set for the next phase of restoration. The bodies are formed, but the crucial element that will bring them to full life is still missing. Ezekiel awaits God's next instruction: the breath of life, the complete restoration. Although the bodies were formed, they lacked one fundamental element: life. They were just empty forms, without the life force to animate them. Ezekiel, observing this inert army, knew that God's work was not yet complete. So, once again, God gives the prophet an order: prophesy to the breath. Prophesy, Son of Man, and say to it, this is what the Sovereign Lord says. Come from the four winds, O breath, and breathe into these slain, that they may live. The most powerful moment of this vision approaches. As Ezekiel prophesies, something miraculous happens. The spirit of life, the ruach in Hebrew, which means breath, wind, or spirit, enters the bodies. As the wind blows over them, the valley begins to come to life in a spectacular way. What were once just inert bodies now become a vigorous army, standing, ready to live and fight. This breath is the essence of life, given directly by God, that completes the work of restoration. This second phase of the vision is crucial because it reveals that God's restoration is not superficial. He does not simply gather up broken pieces and form a structure. He goes further and breathes life, renewing the essence of what was once dead. For Israel, this was the promise that the nation would not only be reunited physically, but also renewed spiritually. They would not only be an outwardly restored people, but would maintain new life and purpose as a mighty army under God's direction. The breath of life also reminds us of something fundamental. Real transformation only occurs when there is spiritual renewal. We may experience external changes in our lives, restored relationships, resolved problems, but without the breath of the Spirit, the transformation remains incomplete. It is God's Spirit who brings true life, who renews our hope and sets us on our feet again to move forward. Now, the valley that was once filled with dry bones is filled with life. The raised-up army represents the fullness of the restoration that God can bring, both to Israel and to our lives today. Contemporary application: restoration in our lives. Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones transcends its historical context and speaks directly to us in our own time. Like the Israelites, we often find ourselves in situations where all seems lost, where hope is completely dead. We may find ourselves surrounded by dry bones in different areas of our lives. Broken relationships, unfulfilled dreams, a faith that seems to have faded, or a career that has come to a standstill. In such moments, despair and resignation can easily set in. However, Ezekiel's vision invites us to look at these areas with new eyes. The same God who transformed the Valley of Dry Bones into a living army is the one who can act in our lives today. Just as Ezekiel was called to prophesy over what seemed lifeless, we are called to trust that God can restore what seems irretrievably lost. We may ask, what does it mean to prophesy over the dry bones in our lives? It means speaking words of life, hope, and faith into situations that seem dead. It means believing that God can work in ways beyond our comprehension and transform the impossible into reality. No matter how dry or broken something may seem, God is able to breathe new life and bring renewal. We see this truth in the lives of many people today. There are stories of marriages that were restored when all seemed lost, of people who found new purpose after long periods of discouragement, and of individuals who experienced spiritual renewal in the midst of emptiness. Each of these stories is a testimony that God's breath of life is still available to us. The contemporary application of Ezekiel's vision is clear. What is dead in our lives can be restored. We just have to trust in God's power and allow Him to breathe His Spirit upon us. Conclusion: faith, renewal, and hope. The vision of Ezekiel 37 is more than just a prophetic narrative. It encapsulates a timeless message of faith, renewal, and hope, showing that even in the darkest of situations, God has the power to restore what is dead. The Valley of Dry Bones represents not only Israel in its state of exile, but each of us in our moments of desolation. Even when our challenges seem insurmountable, God is able to transform scenarios of death into life. The restoration that Ezekiel witnessed was not just physical. It was spiritual, deep, and complete. It reminds us that true renewal begins from the inside out. God is not just a broken God. He breathes new life and purpose into us. This process demands our faith, to believe that even in the face of the impossible, He can do all things. So the question that resonates is, are you ready to trust in God's transforming power? Are you willing to surrender your dead areas to Him, allowing the Spirit to breathe new life into you? Ezekiel's vision reminds us that we are never without hope, for the God who raises dry bones is the same God who grows old in our lives today. Subscribe now and continue exploring the mysteries of the Christocentric Bible with a focus on Christ and lots of study and responsibility. Don't miss the next videos. Activate the bell to always be connected to content that will transform your worldview.